All right, so welcome to Introduction to Philosophy. Most of you are probably taking this as a free elective or to satisfy one of your humanities general studies requirements. Okay, but in any event, I'm glad you're here. I'd like you to keep one thing in mind throughout not only this class semester, but in all your classes, that the purpose of higher education is only in part to teach you either a particular skill or a particular body of knowledge. Because we have a deeper, more significant purpose in higher education, which is to teach you how to learn. Okay. Now, of course, Delgado is part of the Louisiana Technical College system. Okay. So many students are here to seek an associate's degree in a particular field, after which they'll go directly into the workforce. Okay, like something in allied health, if you're becoming a nurse, or if you're in culinary, or something like that. But no matter where you go to work, if that's your path, you probably already are aware that not every hospital does things the same way. They may have the same basic guidelines, which are laid down by the American Medical Association, but every business has its own nuances, its particular way of doing things. And so the skill to learn, to adapt, to think critically and on your feet is, in my estimation, the most important thing that we can give you. Okay? Well, philosophy itself, one might argue, is really an exercise in learning how to learn. Because, in a sense, genuine learning is, as Yoda says, to unlearn what you have already learned. Part of the human condition, or human nature, is the tendency to cling to our familiar ways of thinking and being. We have a savvy, a know-how. We know how to get around the world, how to navigate situations. And most of us, by the time you reach your late teens, early 20s, have a basic worldview. Okay, now that might be a religious worldview, it might be a scientific worldview, but whatever overarching paradigm or basic explanation for human existence one may subscribe to, it is in terms of that basic worldview that we understand the events of our lives. Okay. If something traumatic happens in your life, or something joyous, we as individuals interpret those events in terms of the more fundamental way in which we have come to think about what it means to be a human being. If you're a Christian, you will interpret the events of your lives in terms of the plan of salvation. If you are a Darwinist, you may interpret the events of your life in terms of the process of natural selection. Okay? Well, one of the most essential lessons that we must learn as philosophical beings is that the worldview which you have adopted, which allows you to make sense of the things that happen, is not the only one. And of course, we're all aware of this. And that is why discussions about religion or politics generally get heated, emotional, because the way in which we have come to understand who we are is our comfort zone. We find solace, safety in our familiar way of thinking about what it means to be human and what it means for you as an individual human being to be. And so when we are presented with a conflicting worldview, our first reaction is generally resistance. Because an alternative worldview threatens to tear our temples down, either literally or in a metaphorical sense. But whether you're talking to Yoda, or you're talking to Socrates, or any philosopher worth his or her salt, you will find that we are urged to learn how to detach from that familiarity. Because even if your way of thinking about where the world came from, or the meaning of human existence, the purpose of your individual existence, even if that way of thinking is true, let's say that the Buddhist worldview is true, and you're a Buddhist. By considering other perspectives on what it means to be in the world as a human being, can only enrich your personal worldview, or perhaps even supplant it, replace it with a different way of thinking. One of the lessons that we'll find repeated in the various moments of this course, which are the various periods and themes belonging to the history of philosophy, is that when we become convinced that our familiar worldview is either the only correct one or perhaps the only one, we do ourselves an injustice, a disservice. we enslave ourselves. We set up parameters within which we feel we must live our lives in order to be good or to be happy, to find salvation, to be redeemed from our suffering. And so, as is the case with higher education itself, the discipline of philosophy, which is the eldest of the disciplines, because as long as there have been human beings, there has been the call to philosophical thinking. We all, at some point, ask, why? Why am I here? Why was I born in the first place? Why me? Why did this happen to me? The task of education in the truest sense, and philosophy itself, is to help us learn how to learn, which means learning to be critical of what has grown familiar, and at least to become aware that there are other ways of interpreting the world and what seems to be the case. Because what seems to be the case, of course, isn't always actually the case. Okay? From the time we are this big, we understand that there's a difference between the way something appears and the way it is in reality. If you look at a stop sign from a great distance, it may appear to be round, rather than, what are they, pentagons? Hexagons? How many sides are on a stop sign? They're octagonal? Okay. But we know that in reality they aren't circular. If I put a pencil in a glass of water, how does it appear? It appears to be bent because of the relative speed of light through which, the relative speeds with which light travels through air and water. But in reality, we say it isn't bent. It just looks that way. And we certainly know that people, unfortunately, can seem to be one thing. And we come to find out that in reality, they are not what they seemed to be. That either they have intentionally misrepresented who they are and their intentions toward you, or you have either consciously or subconsciously allowed yourself to believe that a person was a certain way. Perhaps you needed to believe. Well, this distinction between appearance and reality is the basis for the philosophical discipline called metaphysics. Metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of ultimate reality, or what is ultimately real. The world appears in a certain way. And of course, the way the world appears to us is not only a function of the way things are, but also of who you are. you and I might interpret the very same event in very different ways based on who we are, our experiences, our education, even our language, even our mood can alter the way the world appears. If you're in a downtrodden mood, if you're gloomy, then the world appears tired, worn out. But then you get some wonderful bit of news, and suddenly it's God's glorious world again. Well, as metaphysicians, we want to understand the real inner nature of things. What are things really like, as opposed to how they merely appear to be? And as we get more sophisticated in our metaphysical questioning, we may come even to challenge the legitimacy of that distinction. Maybe there is no single fixed reality. Maybe everything is perspectival or relative to who we are. But if I say, for example, and I'm not saying this, but many have, neither am I not saying this, that God exists and created the universe according to a certain design and for a specific purpose. Of course, as a rational being, which each of us is, you are well within your rights to ask me, how do you know that? What is your evidence? How do you know that God exists? How do you know that this set of scriptural passages are the legitimate ones as opposed to these others? And when we ask about what it means to know something, what counts as a piece of knowledge as opposed to a mere opinion or belief, then we are doing epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge and what it means to know something. What are the criteria that must be satisfied in order for me to call one of my beliefs knowledge rather than merely opinion? And the history of philosophy in the Western world, beginning about 500 years BC in Greece, especially Athens and the surrounding territories, has consisted of metaphysical questioning, which always must also include an epistemology. We seek to explain what the world is really like and how we know it. But as philosophers, the evidence that we give is in the form of reasoning, the tool that a philosopher must employ is human reasoning. And what separates or distinguishes good reasoning, sound reasoning, from unsound reasoning is the philosophical discipline of logic, okay, which, of course, is its own branch of philosophical thought. And certainly you can take a course in logic, just as you can take a course in epistemology or in metaphysics. Because this is an introduction to philosophy course, and philosophy in the Western world over the past 2,000 plus years has largely been an exercise in metaphysics, I will introduce the discipline by tracing the unfolding historical conversation held between thoughtful people, people concerned or drawn, called to ask philosophical questions. Metaphysicians, of course, ask the big questions. Does God exist? Where did the world come from? Do I have a spiritual reality, a soul, or am I just a material thing like everything else? Does human existence have a meaning, a purpose, an end? Or is it just an absurd moment in the history of the universe, signifying nothing? But of course, one way in which the truth, taken in the broadest sense, reveals itself is through beauty. And the Greeks, and when I say the Greeks, I primarily mean Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the three major ancient philosophers in the Western world. The way that certainly Plato and Socrates and Aristotle understand truth is that it can reveal itself through the beautiful, that there is a deep relationship between truth and beauty. Some have gone as far as to say that truth is beauty and beauty is truth. Is anybody a fan of poetry? Read Emily Dickinson. She has a poem that goes something like this. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb when one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room. So even the poet understands or suspects that beauty and truth are inextricably bound together. And thus, the history of philosophy has also been an exercise in aesthetics. Aesthetics is the study of the beautiful. What does it mean for a thing to be beautiful? When I say that X is beautiful, whether it's a person or a thought, a gesture, a work of art, am I saying something which carries objective authority, or is beauty, as we commonly say, really just in the eye of the beholder? Is it purely relative? Can two people have contradictory views regarding the beauty of something and both be correct. Now there are various methods, and like any scientist, and philosophy is as much a science as it is an art. Every scientist has a method. And of course, since the 17th century, really 16th century, and people like Isaac Newton, Francis Bacon, we have a codified scientific method. And this is something which you learned at some point in grade school or high school. We begin with observation. We observe things. We record that information and call it data. And then we hazard an explanation for why things happen the way they do. We call that what? A hypothesis. Then we test our hypothesis under controlled conditions. And if we arrive at the same result consistently, without a counterexample, then we may be inclined to call our hypothesis a law, perhaps a law of nature, like the laws of gravitation. The laws of gravitation were formulated by Isaac Newton when he was 20 years old. But as philosophers, the scientific method, of course, is only part. We begin by observing the world. Where else could I begin? I sense things. One may see, hear, touch, taste, smell something. But then that sensory information is given to our faculty of reasoning, the higher order faculty that separates human beings from other kinds of beings. I mean, my dog does many of the same things that I do. Eats, sleeps, reproduces. But what makes me different than my dog is that I ask what it means to do these things. And I am concerned that I do them correctly. If it even makes sense to say that there is a correct way to do these things. We care. As Martin Heidegger, the great 20th century phenomenologist, whom we are going to consider as the very last philosopher for the semester, argues is that human beings are essentially caring beings. We care about things. And what we care about most of all is ourselves. And that isn't to suggest something like selfishness or put a negative spin on human nature. It is simply to observe that we are concerned with the way we live our lives. And when death is imminent, we will look back on the life that each of us has led and make some sort of judgment. And we want to feel that we have lived a good life. Now, of course, that question, what it means to live a good life, what does it mean to be good, is the question which guides the discipline of philosophy we call ethics. And of course, you can take a course in ethics. Some of you have taken my Introduction to Ethics course. And of course, a college course dedicated to ethics will be guided by a much more narrow question than a course which purports to introduce the discipline, such as the current one. In the ethics course, we ask a single question. The entire semester is guided by the single question, what does it mean to be good? What is the meaning of goodness? And in fact, we even can ask whether the question itself is legitimate. Is there a good way of being human as opposed to some other way? Is there a difference between the good life and a good life? Okay. And the philosopher that first raised that question with passion and systematic reasoning was Socrates. Socrates lived in the 4th century BC. He died in 399. He was executed. In fact, a colleague and friend of mine just got back from traveling to Greece and visited Socrates' jail cell. And when this stuff is connected, I'll show you the pictures where Socrates actually sat, awaiting his poison. Now, what Socrates contributes to the history of philosophy is absolutely indispensable to understanding what it means to think philosophically. Because no matter what kind of philosophical question we raise, if our questioning becomes nothing more than an intellectual exercise, just argumentation for the sake of argumentation, then at least in the way that Socrates regards philosophical thought, and I myself as well, you have gotten off track somewhere. Because the entire point of raising questions is a quality of life issue. We want to live a good life. But in order to live a good life, we first must discover what it means to live a good life. And of course, what it means for a human being to be good is different than what it means, let's say, for a marker to be good. I can easily tell you whether this marker is good or bad by using it. If it writes on the board and it is legible, dark, then it's a good marker. Once it runs out of ink, it is no longer of any use to me, and so it is not good. So I understand what it means to be a good marker in terms of my understanding of what the marker is supposed to be, what it is meant to do, its purpose. If it fulfills its purpose, it's a good marker. If it fails, it is not. Likewise, perhaps it makes sense to say that before I can render a judgment about whether my life has been a good one, or even a particular action, whether something I did was good or bad, I must first have some conception of what it means to be a person. But that question is far more elusive than the question about what it means to be a good marker. This is easy, because we created this thing for a specific purpose, and that's its meaning. But we did not create ourselves. We are in possession of a life that we did not solicit. We didn't ask to be born. And yet, we are completely responsible for what ultimately becomes of us. That doesn't say that we are in control of everything that happens to us. Certainly, most of the things that happen are beyond my control. But what is more important than that which does happen to me, for me, is how I think about what happens. And when your thinking changes, everything changes. Perhaps I might even say that the entire point of any philosophy course or any exercise in philosophical reasoning is to learn again how to think, how to reason, how to be critical, rather than simply subscribing to the interpretation of things which has been handed down to us. The worldview of our parents or friends, preachers, teachers, psychologists. They may all give you a different story about what it is to be a person. But you will keep knocking on different doors until you find an answer which works for you. A way of thinking about your life that can justify your suffering. Because human existence is not easy. It's profoundly difficult. Because whether we understand why we are here, and ultimately, I'll just take the liberty of telling you, in my opinion, What it means to be a person is a matter of what you decide it is. We must make a decision at some point about what it all means and what it means to succeed as a human being. Well, the first reading, the first topic in this journey we're going to take from 400 BC to the present day begins in Athens, Greece, and Socrates, who was the teacher of Plato, just as Plato then became teacher to Aristotle, Aristotle to Alexander the Great. And this makes sense, beginning with Socrates, not only from a chronological point of view, given that he was the first thinker to make the question of what it means to be good systematic, more than just a matter of opinion. The first one to suggest that there is an answer to what it means to live a good life. Whether we can discover it is another question. But it also makes sense to begin with Socrates from a philosophical point of view, because we are going to read a work called The Apology, written by Plato. Everything we know about Socrates, nearly almost everything, is given to us in Plato's writing. And Plato always wrote dialogues. The writing of Plato reads like a script for a play. Sometimes the conversation which Socrates had with his friends or enemies or strangers is simply narrated to us by Socrates himself. Sometimes they are narrated by strangers or particular figures that were the contemporaries of Socrates. At other times, we are immediately present to the action. Okay? But Plato himself never speaks directly to us. He always removes himself. And I think that there's something revealing in that itself, and we'll talk about it. But in this work, called Plato's Apology, we find Socrates being charged with 2 capital offenses. He's in a court of law. And in ancient Greece, unlike our legal system where we select 12 jurors, every citizen voted on everything. And so, as you'll see, Socrates is being charged with corrupting the youth, and also with not believing in the gods of the state of Athens. We know that the ancient Greeks, were polytheistic. What does that mean? They believed in many different gods, okay? there was a god for every aspect of human existence. Right? A god of wine, god of beauty, god of love, god of war, and goddesses. And they have Roman equivalents. And Socrates was charged with not believing in the right ones. And of course, it's no spoiler for me to tell you that Socrates was found guilty and executed at 70 years old. So, as we read the Apology, which, by the way, is your assignment for Wednesday, it's about 20 pages. It's not a long, terribly long read, nor is it terribly difficult. There are moments in your reading of the Apology where things will get confusing, okay? But that is simply because learning to read philosophical works is different than reading something more ordinary, okay? But you'll be able to make it through. I want you to keep on reading. Even if you don't think you're understanding what's happening at a certain moment, keep going, because then things shift, and you'll begin to understand again. And one thing that you will find, and which is one of the learning outcomes that we hope you will achieve by taking this course, is that you will become a more sophisticated reader. That your reading comprehension, your vocabulary, your skills of analysis will be refined. And you will discover that by the end of the course, you're not the same student you were at the beginning. You have changed. You have learned. But again, learning, at least as Socrates understands it, and Plato, and I myself, does not most fundamentally mean learning this particular skill set or body of knowledge. It means being reminded that my personal way of thinking about things is not the only one, nor necessarily the correct one. Simply becoming aware that there are alternative ways of thinking about all of this, where it came from, what it means, where I'm going, is the first step. But to make that step poses us the challenge of critically evaluating our familiar way of thinking about things. We must learn to detach. It's an exercise in freedom. And I wouldn't hesitate to make the claim that really what philosophy as a discipline itself really is, at bottom, is learning how to execute your freedom. Not execute in the sense of kill, execute in the sense of play it out. Let it be, let it happen. Learning to be free. Because we become enslaved by oppressive ways of thinking. When you get stuck on the past, when you can't let go of something that happened, when you can't shake your guilt for something you either did or failed to do. It's like being imprisoned, a prison of your own making, and learning how to free yourself from that intellectual captivity is what philosophy is about. So as you read Plato's Apology, and in a moment I'll talk about how you do that, I want you to keep in mind that our focus is not simply what happened to Socrates and why, but rather what is Socrates calling us to do. Of course, on the surface of things, he's defending himself against those charges. He's trying to justify the way he led his life. But he lived as a philosopher. And so the apology is at the same time a justification of the philosophical endeavor itself. He's telling us why we ought to think philosophically. And the very same forces which sought to silence the philosopher in Socrates exist today, here. There is a cohort of Delgado faculty, administrators, who think that Delgado should be a strictly technical college, that we should do away with the arts and humanities. They aren't necessary. Well, that is tantamount to saying that we shouldn't teach anymore. Because once you know how to read, you can learn practically anything on your own. You don't need me to go read the history of philosophy. So let's assume that we teach you how to be a nurse, how to be a chef. And send you off into the workplace. You may be an excellent chef, but we haven't given you any skills or even guidance in thinking about what that means. It's not enough to know how to do something well. If you feel or suspect somewhere in your heart of hearts that human existence itself is unjustified, that the suffering we endure as human beings, and everybody suffers, makes human existence an absurd proposition. It's not enough for us simply to do this or that. We have a thirst for understanding. We want to feel like our lives mean something. That I'm doing something more than simply earning a paycheck. For what? Put food on the table? A roof over your head? To have a good time once in a while? You can get all that stuff, but still be completely unfulfilled. All right. That's all I want to say in the way of the course content. Okay? In the few minutes that remain, I want to talk about the logistics of the course. Okay? How do we proceed? Everything that you will do in here is going to involve Blackboard. So first of all, if you are not comfortable or familiar with Blackboard, you need to jump into it. Okay, now, first of all, that is not just for that's for any course these days. Okay? If you go to the Delgado Community College homepage, you'll find a text box there with a number of links. Okay? Like email, current students, faculty, and one of those links says Blackboard. Click on Blackboard. That will bring you to a page that shows you all your courses. And so you will click on Philosophy 101-102. Okay? And that will bring you to our home page. On our home page, in the left-hand margin, you'll find various links. One of them is the course syllabus. Okay? Notice that I'm not handing out syllabi to you right now. It's a waste of paper. You can print it out if you'd like, of course. Okay? But you don't have to, because you can simply download it. Or simply just navigate to it every time. It's that quick. I want you to read the syllabus, okay? Because that is our policy. The syllabus tells us everything that we will do, what we hope to accomplish, what your grade consists of, and I may as well just tell you, for one thing, there is no writing, which might surprise you. All of your assessments, and by assessments we mean quizzes and tests, are multiple choice. And they are taken in Blackboard. Hence, another link you'll find on the left side of the page there says Assessments. And if you click on that, immediately will open a page that says Quiz number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Midterm, Quiz 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Final Exam. You will take these quizzes and exams wherever you want. You just need a computer with an internet connection. Okay? You can do it from your home. If you don't have, a computer that's capable of doing this, we have a number of centers on campus, the Hibernia Center in this building, okay? Or a library, anywhere you can get an internet connection. And when the time comes, which is indicated by the course calendar, which is another link you'll find on the Blackboard page, you will see that and also receive an announcement that quiz number 1 is available. Okay? And I'll make the quiz available for at least 24 hours, usually more like 48 hours, okay? Maybe even 72 hours. And in that space of time, you need to take the quiz. Now, of course, you're on your own. So you can use your notes. You can use your book. Or I should say, the readings, since they're all online. But of course, that might not be an advisable approach. I would not go into the quizzes thinking, well, I've got all the stuff here. I've got these notes. So why do I have to study? Okay? You don't want to be scrambling to find the answers in your notes somewhere when you're actually taking the quiz. Okay? So you've got 25 minutes to answer 10 questions. Each quiz is 10 questions, multiple choice, 4 possible answers, only one of which is correct. And no 2 students will ever take the same quiz, because Blackboard creates your personal quiz from a larger pool of questions which I have created. Okay? So not only might you get different questions than another student, it also rearranges the order of the questions and the order of the answers. All right. Now we'll talk more about the quizzes and such when we get there. But after you read the syllabus, and on a daily basis, you should be checking the calendar, which is also there on the left-hand side. The calendar specifies every single reading assignment, quiz, test, and when they are for the entire semester, day by day. Okay? So if you miss a class, you don't need to email me asking, hey, what did I miss? It's all right there. That is what we did that day. Okay? All right. So read the syllabus, check out the calendar, okay? And go to the link that says readings, and you'll find that Plato's Apology is the first link in the readings page. Do your best with it, and come to class on Wednesday prepared to discuss what Socrates is trying to teach us. Yes, ma'am? There is no textbook. There's nothing for you to buy. Okay? Everything that we will read in here is in the public domain, which means that the copyright has expired. Okay? And even if it hasn't, so long as I put it under Delgado's Blackboard rubric, we aren't violating any copyright laws because we're using it strictly for educational purposes. We aren't using it for profit. Okay? All right. Now, if you do have any difficulties, of course, email me. And you want to check your Delgado email every single day, first thing in the morning, because this is how your instructors will communicate with you. If I need to tell you something, right, if I get a flat tire on the way to school, I'm going to use my phone to send you a message to your email, okay, saying, hey, I don't think I'm going to make it. And that's something you would want to know while you're still laying in bed, okay, or doing whatever it is you're doing before coming here to find that nobody's here, okay? I will always let you know if there's going to be a change of plan, all right? Okay, I'll see you Wednesday. Did anybody get here late? Not on the roll.